Nobody came to my brother's funeral but me. Then they came for his walls.
For 2 years, Della Mae Foster was the only living soul who climbed the gravel road to Stony Fork to stand at her brother's grave. The rest of the family had buried Sonny Foster long before he died, buried him under 40 years of calling him a fool, a waste, the Foster who never amounted to anything. They were wrong about him. They were wrong about the leaning gray house at the end of the holler that all of Caudle County called an eyesore. Because behind one ordinary wall of that house, sealed in the dark, was something so carefully hidden, so quietly valuable, and so completely misjudged by every person who ever laughed at Sonny Foster, that it would take a widow with $1,400 to her name and make her a wealthy woman, and make the ones who came back for it go silent with shame. Stay with me. The rain came sideways off Pine Knob the morning they put Sonny Foster in the ground, and the only family at the grave was his sister. There had been 5 foster children once. 2 were already in the clay. The other 2, Roy and Lurline, lived close enough to drive and did not. So Della stood alone in a borrowed black coat with a hem she had taken up herself, and watched 2 men from the funeral home lower a pine box into the red Virginia ground. She did not cry. She had done her crying for Sonny a long time before, in small pieces, across 40 years of hearing the family call him worthless. He had been 76. He never married. He never left the holler. When he died, the county taped a notice to his door and waited. Nobody came. For 2 years, nobody came. Della was 74 now. The shirt factory where she had stood at a sewing machine for most of her life had closed in 2009 and never reopened, and the town had been closing quietly ever since. She lived on a Social Security check that arrived on the 3rd of the month and was mostly spoken for by the 4th. Her hands had not forgiven her for the 40 years. The knuckles had swollen into knots that ached when the weather turned, and the weather up here was always turning. She had never once set foot in Sonny's house. She had a key to it, a worn iron key that had come to her with his few belongings, and for 2 years she had carried it in the bottom of her purse and not used it. The house was the part of Sonny she had stopped trying to understand. He had played music she could not read a note of, lived a life nobody in the family approved of, and she had loved him through all of it without ever pretending to follow him into it. Then the letter came. The county was going to sell the house for the back taxes. 2 years unpaid. Roy had gotten the same letter, and Lurline, and neither had answered it. Roy had called Sonny a fool at their mother's table for 40 years. Lurline had stopped returning his calls sometime in the 90s and never explained why. A falling down house at the end of a gravel road was worth less than the gas to drive out and look at it. Let the county have it. Let it go. Della read the letter at her kitchen table 3 times. Then she got the coffee can down from the top of the cupboard. She drove to the county seat on a Tuesday. At the treasurer's window she counted it out. 1,400 and change, most of it in small bills. The savings of a woman who had learned long ago how to make almost nothing stretch. The young clerk watched the pile grow. "It's a lot of money to put on a place like that," she said carefully. "I'm sure," Della said. The clerk stamped the receipt and slid it under the glass. Della pressed it flat with her thumb, the same way she had pressed 1,000 seams flat under a needle, smoothing a worthless-looking thing until it looked cared for. She did not buy a house that morning. She refused to let her brother disappear twice. Out in the lot, she sat in the cold car a long while. $1,400. The last of it, near enough. Spent on a house she had never walked into, for a man the whole world had decided was nothing. She took the iron key out of the bottom of her purse and held it in her swollen hand. Tomorrow. For the first time in her life, she would go inside. The paved road gave her up 3 miles short of the house. After that, it was gravel, and then it was 2 ruts with a spine of dead grass between them, and the old wagon crawled and pitched along the bottom of Stony Fork, with the creek running brown and high on the left. Della drove with both hands on the wheel and her purse on the seat beside her, the iron key resting on top of it where she could see it. She had lived 40 minutes from this holler her whole life and had never once driven to the end of it. The mountains closed in. The light went green and underwater the way it does in a deep cut where the sun only reaches the floor at noon. And then the trees opened, and the house was there. It was worse than the photographs in the county file. It was worse than she had let herself imagine. A long, low house of gray board, sagging toward the creek the way a tired animal lies down. The porch had dropped at one end. The tin roof had peeled back at a corner. One window was a black, empty socket, and by the door, faded near to white, the county's notice still hung from a single nail. Della sat in the car and looked at the thing she had spent $1,400 to keep. For a moment, the clerk's careful voice came back to her. It's a lot of money to put on a place like that. And the cold doubt came with it. She had emptied a coffee can for this. A leaning shack at the end of the world, 9 miles from anywhere, that the family had been right about all along. She got out anyway. The mountain cold went straight through her thin coat and found the ache in her hands. She worked the corroded padlock with the iron key until it gave, and pushed the front door into the dark. The smell came out to meet her first. Mildew and mouse and wet plaster. The smell of a house that had been losing its long argument with the weather. The front room was exactly what the whole county had promised. A collapsed armchair, water stains blooming down the wall, a drift of dead leaves in the corner where the broken window let the holler in. Nothing here but ruin and the proof that everyone had been right. She almost turned around, but there was a door at the back of the room. A second door in the inside wall, fitted close and square in a house where nothing else sat square anymore. Della crossed to it over the soft floor and put her hand on the latch and pushed. The smell changed. Not mildew. Something dry and oiled and entirely its own. Warm tape and machine oil and old cedar. The held breath of a room that had been kept. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes find the shape of it in the gray light coming through a clean-swept window, and slowly her brother's whole hidden life took form in front of her. It was a music room, not a wreck, not an empty shell. A workshop kept the way a careful man keeps the one place that is his. Along the inside wall ran a long bench, its surface worn smooth. Above it, a reel-to-reel machine sat under a square of clean cloth, drawn up against the dust like a sheet over something sleeping. And on shelves that climbed the wall, in rows, in their hundreds, were tape reels, boxed, stacked, labeled, ranked like books in a library nobody knew was here. A guitar hung on the wall by its neck. Beside it, on a nail, 3 harmonicas in a row. Della Mae Foster, who had never in her life been able to read a single note of music, stood in the middle of 40 years of her brother's work and could not take it in. She did not touch anything. She only stood there and let it be true. This was the man the family had buried as nothing. On the end of the bench was a dented steel thermos she half remembered from the cab of his truck, and beside it, a wooden chair worn into the shape of one particular man. The seat dished, the arms rubbed pale where his hands had rested 10,000 times. He had sat here. In all the years she had thought of him as a tired old man who played for no one, he had been driving out to the end of this holler alone, to sit in that chair, in this room full of sound, and do the work nobody ever saw. Her eye caught the harmonicas, and a memory came. Sunny at 19 on their mother's porch, cupping one of these in both hands while their father stood in the door and told him to find honest work. He had only smiled and kept playing. Della stood in the cold shop a long time. Then she did the thing she had always done with a feeling she could not afford to sit in. She went out to the car for her bucket and her rags. Some people pray. Della cleaned. It was the only way she had ever known how to begin to understand a place, to put her hands on it, to make a worthless-looking thing look cared for, one corner at a time. She had no idea yet what she was standing in the middle of. She only knew that her brother had built it, and kept it, and died with the door closed. She carried the bucket into the back room and set it down, and behind her, on the wall she had not looked at yet, the hundreds of reels waited in the dark for somebody to play them back. She woke before dawn, the way she had woken for 40 years. Out past the broken window, the holler was filling with mist. It came up off the creek and lay in the low places and moved when nothing else did, a slow gray tide that rose through the trees until the mountains were islands. Della lay on the folding cot in her brother's back room, under 2 blankets and her coat, and listened to the house tick and settle in the cold. She had nowhere else to be. The room over the old hardware store in town had gone when her last check did. This leaning house at the end of Stony Fork was, now, the only roof she had. So she did what she knew how to do. She made it hers, one corner at a time. For 3 days, she cleaned. She swept out the mouse nests and the dead leaves. She covered the broken window with plastic sheeting and tape, the same trick she had used on 100 cheap rooms nobody else bothered to fix, pressing the corners square with her thumb. By the 3rd afternoon, the wind had stopped coming through, and the back room held the warmth. It was almost a place a person could live. On the 2nd day, she found the harmonica. It was in the drawer of the bench, wrapped in a square of flannel gone soft with age. Not new, not one of the 3 on the nail, but an old one, the kind a man carries. The cover plates were worn down to brass where a thumb had rubbed them for 50 years. She turned it over in her swollen fingers. She could not have played a note on it if her life depended on it, but she knew the shape of it in his hands. She put it in the pocket of her apron, and after that it went where she went. On the 4th morning, she found the girl. Della had carried the slop water out to the edge of the trees in the gray half-light, and there was a shape on the back porch that had not been there the night before. Someone curled on the boards under a thin jacket, knees drawn up, a backpack for a pillow. When Della's boot scuffed the gravel, the shape came awake fast and silent, already half up, already braced. The way you wake when waking up to strangers has taught you what it can cost. She was young, 18, 19. Thin in the way that is not the same as small, with chapped hands and a watch cap pulled low and a few weeks of hard road on her face. The 2 of them looked at each other across the cold yard, the old woman with the bucket and the girl with nowhere to be. And Della understood, with the part of her that had spent her whole life in rooms other people let her stay in, exactly what the girl was bracing for. The hand pointing to the road. The one word, leave. She did not say it. She had braced for that word herself, more times than she could count. She knew that the surest way to make a frightened thing bolt was to keep looking at it. So she turned her face away, toward the house, and spoke to the trees instead of the girl. "There's coffee on," she said, "and oatmeal enough for 2 if you want it." She walked back inside and set 2 chipped bowls on the bench, where for 40 years there had only ever been 1 cup, and stirred the pot and waited. The girl came in when the cold drove her in. She ate the way the hungry eat, fast and ashamed, and she did not say much. Her name was Wren. She had turned 18 in the spring and aged out of the foster system that summer. Out of it, not running from it, which was its own kind of falling. The kind nobody warns you about until the day the caseworker stops calling, and you're standing on a curb with a trash bag and your own 2 hands. Della did not ask where her people were. The absence of them was the loudest thing in the room. "I used to come up here," Wren said finally, looking at the floor. "When I was little. There was a home I stayed at, down the county road a ways. I'd walk up the holler when it got bad and sit under that porch." She turned one of the harmonicas over in her mind, not in her hands. "There was an old man lived here. He played. You could hear it all the way down to the road. I never met him. I just listened." She stopped. "Is he still?" "He was my brother," Della said. "He passed 2 years back." Wren was quiet a moment. Then low, like she was giving something back. "He told me once through the window. I asked him didn't it make him sad, playing for nobody. And he said," she frowned, getting it right, "a song doesn't end. It just waits for somebody to play it back." Della stood very still at the stove. She did not know yet what those words meant. She did not know they were written in a book she had not found, or that they had been the whole shape of her brother's life. She only felt them land somewhere and stay, the way a key turns in a lock long before you understand the door. She held the warm thing in her chest and did not let her face show it, because the girl was watching the way frightened things watch. "Eat," she said. "There's more in the pot." Wren stayed after that. She kept to the edges, wary as a held breath, but she stayed. She held the ladder. She hauled board without being asked. It was the next afternoon, working her way down the wall of reels with her rag, taking each box down to wipe the dust and set it in rows on the swept floor, that her hand caught. She had cleaned to the last board in the corner. And there, where the wall should have run smooth and unbroken, her fingers stopped at a seam that did not line up. The seam did not line up. 40 years at a sewing machine had taught Della one thing the way it taught her nothing else. She knew when a thing had been made to hide a thing. A hem too deep, a patch sewn to match. Her thumb ran the joint between the boards and stopped where the grain went wrong, where the beading that ran true along the whole wall jogged, just slightly, out of step. She set down her rag. She crouched. The wall behind the lowest shelf was tongue and groove cypress, fitted close, the same as the rest. But here, for a stretch about 3 feet wide, the boards had been cut and set into a frame, and the gaps filled and sanded and painted to match, so that you would never see it unless your hand happened to fall across it. The way hers just had. She pressed her palm flat against it and pushed. It gave. A small flex, where no solid wall should flex. Wren had come to stand in the doorway, drawn by the stillness. Neither of them said anything. Della worked her fingers along the edge until she found the seam at the top, and she eased a thin pry bar from the tool rack into it. The way she had eased 1,000 stuck windows, gentle, patient, listening to the wood. The old glue let go in a long, reluctant crack that ran the length of the panel. She set the bar down. She worked her fingers into the gap and pulled, and the whole section of wall came away in her hands, lighter than she expected. A single fitted door of cypress, its hinges hidden so well she had not known they were there. Behind it was a cabinet, built into the cavity of the wall. Cool air breathed out of it. Dry air. The trapped breath of a space that had been sealed a long time and kept its own weather. Della understood, looking at it, why nothing in here had rotted. The cavity had been set into the one dry wall, away from the creek side, lined with tar paper and cedar. He had not just hidden these things, he had protected them. There were 3 shelves. On them, wrapped each one in oilcloth gone stiff and amber with age, were reels. Not the boxed working tapes from the open wall. These were different, and she knew it before she could have said how. Smaller, older. Each wrapped, then bound, then labeled, not with the names of songs, but with the names of people. She lifted one and read the pencil, faded soft as breath. Verley's Mother, Hush Songs, 79. Another, Old Man Caudle, Ballads Nobody Else Has. Another, in a hand that had aged across the years, the letters growing looser. May Sizemore, the long version. Della's hands went still. Sizemore. She did not understand it yet. She only lingered on the name the way you linger on a word, in a language you are just learning. The way her ear had lingered 2 mornings ago on a frightened girl giving up her name across a cold kitchen. She set the reel down very gently and reached for the next thing. It was a book. It lay on the bottom shelf, wrapped in oilcloth and then in canvas, bound with a leather thong gone hard as wire. She untied it with cold, careful fingers. A ledger, the kind a shopkeeper might once have kept, stiff black board, a cloth spine thick as a Bible. She opened it, and there on the first page, in ink gone the brown of weak tea, in a hand that was rough and slow and clearly self-taught, her brother had written a name and a year. She turned a page, then another. Every entry was a person, a name, a song, and under it a line or two in Sonny's blunt hand, who had sung it, who had taught it to them, who was gone now, and had taken everything but this. Reba Hall, 91, sang this at her own table, last one living that knew the 3rd verse. And further down, a name that stopped her cold, a neighbor woman, dead 50 years, who had rocked a 6-year-old Della on a porch 2 ridges over and sung her down to sleep. The song was there. The name was there. Her brother had found it and saved it. A thing she had not known still existed anywhere on this earth. She had to set the book down and breathe. This was the man the family had buried as nothing. At the very back of the bottom shelf, behind where the book had been, was an envelope. It was wrapped in a square of oilcloth, the way you wrap the thing that matters most. Della worked it free and turned it over. Across the front, in the blocky printing of a man who had written her 100 birthday cards and signed them all the same plain way, it said one word. Della. She lowered herself to the cold floor and sat with the envelope in both hands, and for a moment she did not open it. No one had ever left Della Mae Foster anything in her life. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet, folded once, covered edge to edge in Sonny's own hand. She could not read a note of his music, but she could read his writing. She had been reading his grocery lists and his Christmas cards for 70 years. She read the first line. Then she read it again. Then she sat a long while on the cold floor, the creek running low outside, and could not read any further. The lamp was the kind that ran off a cord Sonny had strung from a car battery, and by its light the 2 of them bent over the book. Wren read faster, so they fell into it without deciding to. Wren's finger moving down the page, reading the names aloud. Della listening the way she had always taken things in, through her ears. The book told its story to them both. It was not a list of songs. It was a list of people. Every entry was a name, and under the name a song, and under the song a line or two in Sunny's slow hand about who they were. Reba Hall, 91. Sang this at her own kitchen table. Last one living that knew the third verse. The next page. Caudle. Won't give his first name. Won't sing in daylight. Got him at dusk on the second try. The next. Hush song. Verley's mother. She cried after. Said her own mother sang it to her in 1931, and she'd thought it was gone. He went and got them, Wren said softly, turning a page. All of them. Before they... She did not finish. She did not have to. Della understood now what she was looking at. For 40 years, while the family called him a fool who played for no one, her brother had been driving the 9 miles out to this holler, and then driving past it, up the ridges, down the branches, to the kitchen tables and the front porches of every old singer left in the county. He had carried his machine and his cheap second-hand tape, and he had sat with them, and he had caught their voices one at a time before they took the songs into the ground with them, songs that lived nowhere else. Lullabies, ballads with verses no book had ever held. The sound of a place going quiet, saved by the one man everybody had decided was nothing. Wren stopped on a name and her voice changed. Sizemore, she read. May Sizemore. She looked up. Did you know her? The question on its face was about a name. But Della heard the other question underneath it, the one the girl could not ask straight out. Do I belong to anywhere? Is there a place I came from? Did anybody write me down? I didn't, Della said carefully. But your people are in this book, child. Your people are in this house. She let that sit. That's not nothing. Wren looked back at the page and did not say anything, but her shoulders came down from around her ears just a little. Della turned the pages herself now, slow, with her swollen fingers. Beside each name, Sunny had written the people down. A kindness, a hard year, the way somebody had turned out. The songs were how he kept the people, and his pencil, she saw, going page by page, had grown looser and fainter across the years, the letters spreading, the hand of a man getting old at a bench in a cold room, still writing names down, right up to the end. Near the back, on a page by itself, underlined once, he had written a line that was not a name. Wren read it out before Della could stop her. A song doesn't end. It just waits for somebody to play it back. The room went very quiet. Della had heard those words 4 days ago, from a girl who had caught them through a window as a child and not known whose they were. Now she knew. They had been the whole shape of his life, written in his own hand, sealed in a wall, and carried down the holler the same way it carried everything, quietly, to whoever was left to hear. She put her hand flat on the page the way you put your hand on something to feel that it is real. Then she remembered the letter. She had read the first line on the cold floor and not been able to go on. Now she took it out of her apron pocket, where it had been all afternoon against the worn harmonica, and she unfolded it. And under the lamp she read her brother's last words to her all the way through. It was short. He had never used 2 words where one would do. He left her the house. He left her the back room and everything in it, known and unknown, the songs and the reels and whatever they turn out to be worth. Those were his words, plain and careful, to his sister Della Mae Foster, alone, and he named her to carry it out. He had thought to do this. A man with no wife and no children had sat at this bench and thought about what would happen to all of it when he was gone and who he could trust. And he had made it down in writing and sealed it where only the right kind of looking would ever find it. And at the bottom, under his name, he had written one line more. "You're the only one that never shut the door on me. Knew you'd be the one to come." Della sat with the page in both hands. Outside, the creek ran low, and the mist was coming up off it into the dark trees. Inside, the lamp hummed, and the reels sat in their rows, and her brother, buried by his family long before he died, called nothing for 40 years, had reached across 2 years in the ground to tell her the one thing she had never once been told in 74 years of being the one who stayed. That somebody had counted on her, that she had been seen. She had spent her whole life on the outside of his music, sure it was a thing not meant for her. The same mistake the family had made about the man himself, and she was the only one of them still here to do something about it. There was a reel already threaded on the machine. Sonny had left it there, the last thing he ever played, 2 years ago, before he closed the door. Della reached for the switch. Then she stopped, her swollen hand resting on it, and did not press it. She was not ready yet to hear a dead voice fill the room. The voice filled the room before she was ready for it. She had stood a long time with her hand on the switch. Then Ren came and stood beside her, close but not touching. That made it possible. Della pressed it down. The reels began to turn. A hiss came first, the sound of old tape finding the head. A warm crackle that raised the hair on her arms. And under it the smell of the machine waking, hot dust and oil. Then, out of 2 years of silence, out of the dark of a sealed wall, a woman's voice came up into the room and began to sing. It was old and cracked and true. A hush song, slow, the kind a woman sings with a child against her shoulder, rocking. The words were plain mountain words about the creek and the dark and the morning coming. And the voice did not perform them. It just gave them, the way you give a thing to someone you will not see again. Ren made a sound. Della looked over, and the girl had both hands over her mouth, and her eyes were running, and she was shaking her head slowly side to side, the way you do when a thing is too much and you are trying to keep it out and cannot. "I know it," Ren whispered. "I know that song." She got it out in pieces. "There was a woman at the first place I stayed. The first home. I was real little. She used to sing me that. I forgot it. I forgot I ever knew it." The reel turned. The dead woman sang. And a girl the world had moved 11 times got a piece of herself back across the dark, handed down the holler the same way everything in this house was handed down. Quietly, to whoever was left to hear. Della did not say anything. She put her hand on the girl's thin shoulder and left it there, and the two of them listened to the end. She understood then that she could not keep this in a wall. The next morning she wrapped 3 reels in a clean towel and drove 9 miles to the one place that might know what she was holding. There was a shop on the main street, Pruitt's Records and Repair, and behind the counter, a stooped man of 70-some in reading glasses with the still patience of a heron. Hollis Pruitt had fixed tape machines in that shop for 40 years. He took the first reel from her without much interest, the way a man takes one more box of somebody's attic. He threaded it. He set it turning. Then the voice came up, and Hollis Pruitt went completely still. He did not say anything at first. He listened with his head bent, one hand flat on the counter. Then he stopped it, rewound a few feet, and played the same passage again. He cleaned the head with a careful thumb. He adjusted the speed by a hair. He listened to the same 8 bars 3 times. Then he took off his glasses. He looked out the front window at the wet street for a while before he could speak. "Where did you get this?" he said. "My brother's house, up Stony Fork, Sonny Foster. He left it to me." Hollis was quiet long enough that Della began to feel uncertain. Then he told her, choosing each word the way a careful man chooses them, what she had carried into his shop. "These were not old records," he said. "These were field recordings, original, in the room, of songs that the people who studied this music had long given up as lost. Half the singers in these mountains had died in the last 30 years, with songs in them that had never been written down or caught on tape. And here was a man, working alone, with no schooling and no funding and no name anyone knew, who had gone out and gotten them one by one, while there was still time. Archives, he said, universities, the people who keep this kind of thing for the country. They would give a great deal to know these existed. A great deal, he said again, and looked at her over the counter to be sure she heard it. Then he asked, almost shy, if he might see the book. And when Della let him open the ledger, and he read the first page and then a few of the entries, the names, the lines Sonny had written about each one, Hollis Pruitt, who had thought he had seen everything come through that shop, had to put his glasses back on and take them off again before he was done. Word moved through the county the way water moves through the marsh grass, quietly, filling every low place. Within a week they began to come up the gravel road, careful and curious, the way mountain people come, sideways and slow. The one Della would remember was Verly Combs. She was near 70, and she came up the holler one evening still in the coat she'd worn to her shift, because she had heard there were tapes and she could not wait for the weekend. Della played her what the ledger pointed to, a reel labeled in Sonny's pencil, Verly's mother. Hush song. She cried after, but it was not her mother Verly was listening for. 2 minutes in, a man's voice came in low under the woman's, carrying the harmony the old way, and Verly Combs put her hand out flat against the bench and lowered herself onto it, like her legs had quit, and she said a name, her father's name, out loud, into the room, the way you call to someone across a distance. He had died when she was 20, she said, when she could finally speak. He had never made a record. There was no picture of him that had his voice in it. She had spent 50 years unable to remember exactly how he sounded. And here he was, singing, in a back room on Stony Fork, because Sonny Foster had thought one ordinary evening that a man's harmony was worth catching before it was gone. She did not hide that she was crying. She was 70 years old and past the age of pretending. She drove Verly back down to her car in the dark and came home up the holler full of something she did not have a careful enough word for. She had nearly forgotten Hollis's last words to her. He had walked her out to her wagon that first afternoon, and at the door of the shop he had stopped her, and he had said one thing more, low, so the street would not hear it. "Mrs. Foster, whatever you do." He glanced once at the towel-wrapped reels on her seat. "Don't sell anything to anybody who comes knocking. Word of a thing like this travels, and the people it travels to," he chose it carefully, "they don't always come up the road with kindness in them." She had nodded and thought little of it, in the warmth of the day. But the day word got out of what was on Stony Fork. It did not only reach Verly Combs and the old singer's children. It reached, somewhere down the mountain, a man who had spent his whole life learning the worth of things other people did not yet understand they had. And 9 days after Verly wept on the bench, a clean, dark car that did not belong to anyone in Caudle County turned off the state road and started up the gravel toward the end of Stony Fork. The woman from the city wore white cotton gloves to handle the tapes the whole county had called trash. Hollis had made the call. He knew people the way a man knows people after 40 years behind a counter. And he knew one in particular, a woman who taught at the university 3 hours east and spent her summers chasing exactly the kind of thing now sitting in rows on Stony Fork. Her name was Dr. Naomi Hale. She came on a Thursday, and she stayed 2 days, and she did not say very much at first. She was careful in a way Della trusted right off. She did not exclaim. She unwrapped each reel with her gloved hands, listened with her head bent, and made notes in a tight, even hand. She handled the pencil-labeled boxes the way you handle a thing that cannot be replaced. The second day, Della found her at the bench with the ledger open, her gloved hand resting flat on the page. She was a long way from home, reading the names of mountain people she had never met, and something in her face said she knew she was holding the only proof some of them had ever lived. On the evening of the second day, she sat down with Della at the bench and asked if they could talk plainly. Della said she would rather nothing else. "I want to be careful," Dr. Hale said, "because careful is the only kind of respect a thing like this deserves." She took her gloves off to say it. "These recordings were never released. Your brother never sold them, never licensed them, never signed them over to anybody. As far as I can find, they have never left this room." She let that sit. That matters. It means they belong to his estate, whole and clean. To you. And they're— Della stopped and started again, the careful way. "Hollis said the archive people. He said they'd give a good deal. They will." Dr. Hale chose her words. "I won't put a hard figure on it tonight. Because anyone who gives you a hard figure tonight is lying to you, and you should not trust them after. A real appraisal takes months. There are other people who need to hear these." She turned her notebook around so Della could see the range she had written. "But you asked me to be plain. The collection, the recordings, the rights to songs that exist nowhere else. A working range, conservative, is somewhere between $240,000 and $390,000. It could be less. It could, if the right things happen, be a good deal more. I can't promise you which." Della read the numbers twice. She did not say anything. She got up and walked out onto the porch and stood in the cold. The holler went on being a holler. The creek ran low, indifferent to the fact that everything had just changed. She had spent $1,400 and the family's certainty that she was a fool. She stood with it until it was hers to carry. When she came back in, Dr. Hale was wrapping a reel, and she said one thing more quietly, without looking up. "Mrs. Foster, the recordings are worth a great deal, but the book." She put her bare hand on the ledger. "That's a document. A complete record of a whole tradition as it went under. The kind of thing a university builds a collection around and keeps for 100 years. They'd put his name on it. Sonny Foster. They would teach from it." Della stood very still. For 40 years, they had called him a man who never amounted to anything. And here was a woman who had driven 3 hours and worn white gloves to hold his work, telling her at a place that kept things for the country would carve his name in a wall and teach from what he had done in a cold room alone, for free, for love, while everyone he knew looked away. "He'd have liked that," Della said finally. Her voice did not do what she wanted it to. "He never could get anybody to listen." "People will listen now," Dr. Hale said. "I'll help you do this right, if you'll let me. There's no hurry. Take the time." She left the next morning. Della walked her to her car and stood on the gravel and watched her drive back down the holler toward the world. And she did not cry, because she had done her crying long ago. She sat on the dock, on the leaning porch step, instead, and let the size of it settle at the pace it needed. It might have ended there. A poor widow lifted up out of her hard years by a brother's quiet foresight. A man's name finally carried into the light. That would have been enough of a story. But word of a thing like that travels, exactly as Hollis Pruitt had warned her it would. And it does not always travel to people with kindness in them. 3 days after Dr. Hale drove back east, the gravel road at the bottom of Stony Fork took on a clean, dark car that had never once belonged to this county, careful of its paint, climbing slow toward the house at the end. The man got out of the car like someone who had never once had to hurry for anything. He took his time. He looked at the leaning house, the sagging porch, the holler closing in green around it, and he smiled. Not unkindly, the way a man smiles at a thing he already understands. He wore a good jacket and no tie and shoes that had never met this gravel before. He came up the broken end of the porch without being asked, careful of his footing, and put out his hand. "Cole Devlin," he said. "Meridian Catalog Partners. I hope I'm not intruding." He was. He knew he was. He did it gently. He admired the place. He called it characterful. He said he dealt in old music, masters, catalogs, the kind of thing that slips through the cracks when somebody passes and the family doesn't know what they have. He'd heard about a discovery out this way and simply had to come see. Della stood in the doorway and did not invite him in. She had spent 9 years before the factory cleaning rooms, and the rest of it at a machine, and the whole of it reading the faces of people who held some power over her. She read his now. And the thing she noticed first was the thing he did not do. He stepped up onto the porch and looked through the open door at the front room, the collapsed chair, the water stains, and he did not so much as glance at the inside wall. Not once. A man who'd come about old tapes, and his eyes never went looking for them. He already knew where they were. He had heard a great deal more than he was saying. "I'll be straight with you, Mrs. Foster," Devlin said, "because you deserve straight." He had a warm, even way of talking, like a doctor with bad news he'd delivered 100 times. "What you've got here, old reels, field stuff, it's a charming thing. It really is. But it's a thin market, brutally thin. Conditions always a problem with material that's sat in a damp house for 40 years. And the rights on this kind of thing are a nightmare. Half the time some label from decades back still technically holds the masters, and you spend more in lawyers untangling it than the whole lot ever brings." "That's so," Della said. "It is. I'd hate to see you get your hopes up and then spend 2 years and your savings finding out it's worth less than the trouble." He let that land. "So here's what I can do. I'll take the whole thing off your hands. Reels, the lot, that old account book too. Sight largely unseen as a favor, really. $18,000. Cash. This week. No waiting. No auctions that might never happen. No taxes to puzzle over." He smiled. "Life-changing money, Mrs. Foster, for a room full of old tape. $18,000. For 400 reels of voices that lived nowhere else, and a book a university wanted to build a wing around. And the thing was, Della could see it on him. He believed it. Not the part about the labels. He knew that was a thread to pull on a frightened person. But the rest of it, he believed. In his world, everybody sold in the end, and he had spent his whole life getting there first. He thought he was the smartest mercy this old woman was ever going to get. He could not see that he was exactly what Hollis had warned her about. "No," Della said. "Thank you." She said it the way her mother had taught her to say it, polite and finished. Devlin's smile held. I understand it's a lot to take in. Tell you what. 22. No, thank you. Mrs. Foster, I'm trying to help you here. The warmth thinned a half degree. 25, and that's me being generous against my own partner's advice. No, Della said. Thank you. The third time, her voice did not rise and did not shake. It just closed, the way the back room door closed, square and final. In her apron pocket, her fingers had found the worn harmonica and wrapped around it, and she held it the whole time he talked, and he never knew it was there. Something went out of Cole Devlin's face then, the way warmth runs off a thing when you take it off the stove. He looked at the tired old woman in the thin coat standing in the doorway of a falling-down house, and he could not understand her, and it bothered him, because he understood everybody. You're making a mistake, he said. Not cruel, almost sorry. These things have a way of getting complicated. Clear title, provenance, who actually owns what when a man dies without much paperwork. He came down the porch steps and stopped and turned, one hand on the car door. Assets like these, the question of who they really belong to can get messy in a hurry. Be a shame for it to land on you. He smiled once more, got in, and backed the clean, dark car carefully down the gravel so it would not scrape its paint. It was not a threat. Not quite. But it hung in the cold air of Styron, over Stony Fork like one. And 9 days later, it came true. The letter came on a cold morning at the end of the month. It came from a law office in the city, on heavy paper, in an envelope with a window. And it was filed on behalf of Roy Foster and Lurline Foster Tackett, Sonny's brother and Sonny's sister. The same brother and sister who had called the back room a junk pile and the man who built it a fool for 40 years. The same two who had not driven a single mile of the gravel road while he was alive, and had not stood at the grave when he was put in the ground. Della read it standing at the bench, where the morning light came in through the plastic-covered window. Nobody had come to her brother's funeral but her. Roy had been 40 minutes away. Lurline, an hour. Neither had come. For 2 years after, nobody came. The county taped a notice to his door, and the family let the taxes go. Would have let the whole house be sold off the courthouse steps, because a dead man's shack was worth less to them than the gas to look at it. Then the word got down the mountain that there was money in it. And here they were. The letter was careful. Lawyers' letters always are. It did not say, "We want the money." It said the handwritten will was of questionable validity. It said the deceased had been in declining health and isolated in his final years. It suggested, in the cool, deniable way these things are suggested, that the document had been produced under the influence of the sister who stood to benefit, that there was no telling whether the writing was truly his hand at all, and it noted that absent a valid will, the estate would pass by law in equal shares to the deceased's surviving siblings. They asked the court to freeze any sale. They asked that the collection be divided 3 ways. Della set the letter down on the bench, next to the ledger. 2 pieces of paper. One printed cold by a machine in a city, on behalf of people who had not loved him. The other filled edge to edge in a slow, self-taught hand, the work of a man who had loved a whole county enough to drive out alone for 40 years and catch its voice before it died. 2 kinds of paper, 2 kinds of people. She looked at them lying side by side on the bench and understood exactly what was happening to her. It was not really about winning. A person with a lawyer and a city behind them does not file a thing like this to win. They file to press. to wear down somebody they have decided has less than they do. They had looked at a 74-year-old widow alone on a mountain and decided she would fold. They had decided wrong, but they could not have known that, because they had never once bothered to look at her. She read the worst line again before she made herself stop, produced under the influence of the sister who stood to benefit. No telling whether the writing was truly his hand. They were going to stand up in a courtroom and call her brother feeble. They were going to take the one thing he had finally been seen for, the work, the names, the 40 years of quiet, and call it the confusion of a failing old man. And they were going to call her a woman who'd preyed on him to get it. The two of them, who had buried him alive in their contempt long before the ground ever took him, were going to stand in the light and say she was the one who'd done him wrong. That night, Della did not sleep. She sat at the bench with the ledger open and the worn harmonica in her hand and the lamp burning. She did not turn the pages. She did not weep. She had passed through weeping a long way back. She just sat, tired in a way that had got into the bones, and let the size of it be what it was. On the machine, a reel she had threaded earlier had long since run out. The tail of the tape had come free of the take-up and was going around and around, the loose end slapping the head on every turn. Tick, tick, tick. She did not get up to stop it. She let it go in the dark, a small, mindless sound in a cold room, while a woman who had spent her whole life being the one who stayed sat alone and wondered if staying had ever once been worth what it cost her. It was the lowest she had been since the morning the factory closed. And then, somewhere down toward dawn, with the lamp guttering and the tape still ticking, a thing came back to her. Sonny had written that will. Sonny had taken it down in his own slow hand and folded it and wrapped it in oilcloth and sealed it in a wall behind the reels where only the right kind of looking would ever find it. He had hidden it the way you hide a thing you mean to survive you. Her brother had never once in his life done a thing without thinking it through twice. Della set the harmonica down on the bench and reached over and finally stopped the turning tape. Ada Cobb read the will twice. Then she set it down on her desk, and she looked at Della over it, and she said the thing Della most needed to hear. He saw this coming. Ada kept a 2-room office above the hardware store in the county seat. She was 60-some, unhurried, the kind of lawyer who had spent 30 years watching families come apart over less than this. She had taken the case partly on the merits, partly because she did not like to see a thing like this done to a woman who had kept a promise nobody asked her to keep. "Let me tell you where you stand," Ada said. "Then I'll tell you where the hole is, because there's always a hole, and you'd rather hear it from me than from them." She laid it out plain. In Virginia, a will written entirely in a person's own hand was valid on one condition: that 2 disinterested witnesses could swear the handwriting was truly his. Sonny had written every word, signed it, and dated it. That part was solid, and Sonny had no wife, no children. A will leaving everything to one named person, his sister, to carry it out, was about as clean as such a thing could be. Just a man's plain, written wish. "So they can't beat the will on the law," Ada said, "which means they'll do the only thing left. They'll attack the hand. They'll stand up and say a confused old man didn't write this, or that you stood over him while he did." She took her glasses off. "And here's the whole. To prove the hand, I need 2 witnesses who knew his writing. But they can't be anybody who profits from the will. The minute I put one of your holler neighbors up there, the other side says, of course they back Della. They're all thick as thieves up that creek. I need 2 people who know his handwriting cold and who get nothing out of this. Not $1. The room went quiet. Della sat with it. 2 people who knew Sonny's hand and stood to gain nothing. The holler was full of people who had loved him now that they knew to, but every one of them had a grandfather's voice on those reels, a stake, a reason the city lawyer could wave at. The very people who would swear to him hardest were the ones the court would trust least. She turned it over, tired, and then her swollen fingers found it. "The boxes," she said. Ada looked up. The tapes. He labeled every one. 40 years of them, in pencil, in his own hand. Della's voice steadied as it came to her. "Hollis Pruitt's got no piece of this. He just fixes machines. And the woman from the university, Dr. Hale, she's not in the will. She came from 3 hours off. They've both held those boxes. They've both read his writing across hundreds of labels and the whole ledger besides." She looked at Ada. "They could swear to his hand, and they don't get a thing." Ada Cobb sat back slowly. "Mrs. Foster," she said, "that'll do it." The pencil labels, the small, dull, careful labels a man had written alone in a cold room, never once thinking they were anything. They were going to be the thing that saved his last wish. Della almost laughed. Sonny had spent 40 years writing names on boxes, and the writing was going to outlast every man who'd called him nothing. Then Ada turned to the ledger and to the folder of papers Della had brought, and she found one more thing. And this one made her quiet in a different way. "There's something here you should know about," she said. She had pulled out an old carbon, soft and yellowed. "Back in 1983, he signed a few songs over to a man, some little outfit that came through buying up mountain material cheap. Standard story for that time. They paid him almost nothing and walked off with the rights." She set it down. "But the law caught up with that practice a long time ago, Mrs. Foster. There's a provision. Songwriters, or their estates, can take those old grants back. Reclaim them after enough years have passed. It's meant for exactly this. A young man with no leverage, signing away his work for a few dollars because he didn't know better and had no one to tell him." "Take them back," Della said, "from the people that bought them off him." "From the people that bought them off him." Ada nodded. "Because he left no wife and no children, that right runs to his estate. To you, as the one carrying it out." A small, dry smile. "The federal law agrees with your brother. Some things weren't his to lose for $18 and a handshake, and they don't have to stay lost." Della sat very still. He had known. Not the reels, not the figure on Dr. Hale's pad, but the shape of it. He had known that if this work ever proved worth something, the family who'd called it junk would come for it, and they would come at her. So a long time before he died, alone at that bench, he had quietly built her a wall around the wall. He had protected her before she ever knew she would need protecting. "He was a careful man," Ada said gently, gathering the papers. "He was," Della said. Her voice did not do what she wanted it to. She had spent 74 years thinking she was the one who looked after Sonny. She understood now that at the end, he had been looking after her. Ada walked her to the door. The hearing was set for a bright, cold morning in April. Della would bring the ledger and the worn harmonica in her apron pocket, and 2 people who would stand up in a courtroom and swear to the hand of a man the world had buried as nothing. The old courtroom smelled of floor wax and radiator heat, and the back rows were full of people nobody had asked to come. Roy and Lurline came in first, with their city lawyer between them. carrying the easy confidence of people who had been told their case was strong. Lurline wore a good coat. Roy looked at no one. Della came in with Ada Cobb and a single thin folder. Behind her, filling the back of the room, were the others. Hollis Pruitt, in a pressed shirt buttoned to the throat. Dr. Naomi Hale, who had driven 3 hours that morning. Verlie Combs in her church clothes. Wren, scrubbed and nervous in a borrowed sweater, sitting close. And beside and behind them, 8 or 10 more. The children and grandchildren of the singers in the ledger. Old mountain people in their good clothes, who had heard there was a hearing and had come up out of the hollows without being asked. They did not say anything. They did not need to. The sight of them sitting there said the thing no lawyer was allowed to say. Lurline turned once and looked back at them, and something moved across her face when she understood who they were, that the whole holler had come down off the mountain, and not for her. The city lawyer was good. He was smooth and unhurried, and he used the word fairness a great many times, always about his clients' feelings and never about their conduct. He spoke of a frail and isolated old man at the end of his life. He spoke of a handwritten document with no witnesses, produced, he let the word hang, under the care of the sister who stood to inherit. He suggested, without once saying it outright, that a confused man had been steered, or that the hand was not even truly his. Then Ada Cobb stood up, and she did not raise her voice, and she called her 2 witnesses. Hollis Pruitt took the stand first. He had spent 40 years with sound and the things that carry it, and Ada laid in front of him a stack of the pencil-labeled tape boxes, dozens of them, and the ledger besides. She asked him a plain question. Did he know this handwriting? He did. He had handled hundreds of these boxes, he said, everyone labeled in the same hand, the same slow, careful print. A man who made his letters the way he made everything, to last. He turned the will over in his hands and laid it beside a tape box and let the court see for itself. It was the same hand. There was no question in him at all. Dr. Hale followed. She was a scholar. She did not deal in certainty she had not earned. She had read every entry in the ledger and every label in the collection, she said, and the will was written by the same person, the same formation of letters, the same pressure, the same hand aging across the same years. She had no stake in the estate. She had come, she said, because the truth of it mattered to her, and because a man who had saved what this man saved deserved to have his last word believed. 2 witnesses, neither of whom got $1, both of whom knew his hand cold. Then Ada set the rest of it before the judge. The man left no wife, no children. The will gave everything to his sister, named her to carry it out, written and signed and dated in his own hand. The people calling that will a fraud had not driven up the gravel road once in 2 years, had not paid $1 of taxes, had not come to his grave. They discovered their love for him the same week they discovered what was in his walls. The city lawyer had 1 card left. He produced it now. An old sheet of paper, a note in pencil, and he made of it a small, dark suggestion. Here was the sister's name in the dead man's papers. Here perhaps was proof she had been in his affairs, steering his hand, long before he died. For a moment the room tightened. Della felt it, the thing nearly turning. But Ada Cobb picked up the ledger, the same ledger, the moral heart of the whole thing, sitting there in evidence. And she opened it to the page where Sonny had dated his own entries, and she held the dated note beside it, and she showed the court the plain arithmetic of it. The will and the note had been written and sealed in that wall 2 full years before Della Mae Foster ever set foot inside her brother's house. She had not steered his hand. She had not known the room existed. He had done all of it alone, deciding everything, with no one in the world standing over him but the work. The card fell. There was nothing under it. The judge was a plain-spoken woman who had grown up 2 counties over and knew exactly what a back room full of tape reels meant, and exactly what it meant when a man's whole family ignored him for 40 years and then arrived in a hurry. She read the will once more. She set it down. She looked at the brother and the sister over her glasses for a long moment, and then she found the words. She said the will was unambiguous. She said the testator's intent had been set down with unusual care and foresight, and proven beyond her doubt to be his own hand. She dismissed the claim in its entirety, and then she said one thing more, looking not at the lawyers but at Roy and Lurline directly. "I've seen a great many families in this room," she said, "and in my experience, money shows people what hardship never quite does. You might want to sit a while with what your own conduct here has shown about you." The gavel came down. Della sat still through it. In the back, Verley Combs let out a long breath she seemed to have been holding for an hour, and Wren's small hand found Della's swollen one and held it tight. It was over. The house was hers. The reels were hers. The book was hers, and her brother's name on it. And no one was ever going to take it. Out in the marble hallway after, Lurline was waiting. Not for Della exactly, but in her path. She opened her mouth as if to say something. An apology, maybe. Some defense of herself. And then she found there was nothing she could put into the air that would survive the light of that morning, and she closed it again and walked away. Della did not call after her. There was nothing to call her back to. The reels sold over the following 6 months, slowly, through the serious channels such things move through. Della did not hurry any of it. She did not take the first offer for anything, because she had waited long enough to know the difference between patience and resignation, and she was done confusing the two. Dr. Hale handled the process with the same white-gloved care she had brought up the holler. Each sale deliberate, each decision run by Della first. Nothing signed without Della understanding what she was signing. The estate had been fully probated by the time the house was clear of legal question, and what it cleared to was this. The collection, the book, and every song that had waited in that wall belonged to Della Mae Foster, whole and unencumbered, exactly as her brother had intended. The university came first, for the ledger and the archive rights to the full collection, the largest piece, and the one Della had been most certain about from the beginning. She gave the ledger outright, on 2 conditions: that it be displayed under Sonny's name, with the whole story told alongside it, the collecting and the people both, and that one line from it be set into the wall above the case, where every person who came to read it would have to walk past those words first. They agreed without hesitation, and when they understood the full shape of what they were receiving, they asked if the name of the woman who had saved it might be included as well. Della said that was Sonny's wall, not hers. His name was enough. Then, in the early autumn, a film company reached out through Dr. Hale. A documentary, they said, about the vanishing music of the southern mountains. They had been searching 2 years for something they could not find. A recording with the right voice for a particular scene. A lullaby, the real thing, not reconstructed. They had heard about the collection. They had heard about the woman. The lullaby they wanted was on the 3rd reel Della had ever unwrapped. An old woman's voice, cracked and true, the same hush song Wren had recognized across 20 years of forgetting that first cold morning in the back room. The fee they offered was more than Dr. Hale's high number. On its own, Della sat with that for a long while. On the step of the porch, she had begun to think of simply as the porch, and the mountains were indifferent to it, and the creek ran low the way it always ran low in September, and she let the size of it arrive at the pace it needed to, the way she had learned to let things arrive. When the streaming came, because once the film carried those voices out into the world began to come looking for the rest. Della had already arranged what she wanted done. The estate took what it was owed, taxes paid to the dollar the way an honest account demands. After the commissions and the careful arithmetic, the sum that settled into Della Mae Foster's name was $611,000. She had started with $1,400. She did not do with it what anyone expected. The first money she spent was not on herself. It was on the house. With the probate complete and the title clean, she hired locally and had the building brought back, not as a museum piece, but as what it had always been. A working room. The roof was made sound. The porch was reset. The bench was cleaned but not refinished, because the worn place in the wood was the mark of every elbow that had ever rested there, and Della would no more have sanded it away than she would have crossed a name out of the book. She gave the house a name. She had Hollis letter it on a piece of cedar board and nail it above the door. The Sonny Foster Recording Room, Stony Fork, Caudle County. People came. The old singers first, who had not known until Verley told them that Sonny had caught their voices and kept them safe. They came and listened to themselves on the old machine, and most had to sit down after. Then the younger ones, grandchildren, teenagers, a girl from the next holler over who played banjo and had never once been told she was worth recording. Della recorded all of them. She had spent her whole life certain that music was a thing for other people. She understood now what she had been wrong about. It did not need to be read. It only needed someone to believe it was worth keeping. That was all Sonny had ever done. That was all she had to do. On a Tuesday evening in November, the others had gone. Verley, the teenagers, the banjo girl. The back room was quiet the way it got quiet after people, a warmth left in the air. The lamp was on. The machine was threaded with a fresh reel. Wren was still there. She sat at the end of the bench, in the place where Sonny's chair had always been, and she was looking at her own hands the way she had looked at them that first morning over the oatmeal, like they belonged to someone she was still getting to know. She had been coming up the holler most days since spring, helping with the sessions and the paperwork, and she had never once sat in front of the microphone herself. Della took the worn harmonica out of her apron pocket and set it on the bench beside Wren's hand. She did not say anything. She just set it there, the way you set a thing down when words would be less than the object. Wren looked at it. Then she looked at Della. "I don't know if I can," she said. "I don't know either," Della said. Sonny didn't know either the first time. She crossed to the machine and she put her swollen hand on the switch. The same switch she had been afraid to press that first night, when the dead voice in the room felt like more than she could hold. And she waited. Wren turned to the microphone. She was quiet a long moment. Then she took one breath and opened her mouth and sang. It was the Hush song, the one from the third reel, the one an old woman had sung into a machine in a cold room 40 years ago, and a girl had heard through a window as a child, and a room full of strangers had recognized on a winter morning, without knowing why. Wren did not have the old woman's voice, and she did not try to. She had her own voice, 19 years old and unsteady and entirely true, and she gave it into the room the way you give a thing to someone you hope will be there to receive it. Della pressed the switch. The reels began to turn. She stood at the machine in the lamplight and listened to the girl sing, and she felt the last tight thing in her chest go loose. The thing she had carried since the factory closed, since the money ran out, since she stood alone in the rain over her brother's grave and thought that staying had cost her more than she had left to spend. It went loose and it did not come back. She was 74 years old. She had come up a gravel road with $1,400 to her name and a key to a door she had never walked through. And the door had opened onto this. A room full of sound, a girl singing, and a reel turning to catch it before it was gone. The men who had measured her brother and found him worth nothing had made the oldest mistake there is: to believe that the price of a thing and the worth of a thing are the same. They never understood that the most valuable things a person leaves behind almost never show. They live in sealed walls. They are written in plain hands in books no one thinks to open. They are the name you write beside a voice because you believe it deserves to outlast the silence. And they wait. Wren sang the last line, and the room went quiet, and the reel kept turning in the dark. A song doesn't end. It just waits for somebody to play it back. Outside, the holler filled with night, and the creek ran on, and at the end of Stony Fork there was a light in a window where there had been no light for 2 years. It was on because someone had come up the road and turned it on and decided to stay. And not one song in that room was waiting anymore. If you stayed with this story all the way to the end, thank you. That means more than you know. Before you go, tell us in the comments the name of someone whose quiet work you've been carrying. Someone who never got their name on a wall. We read every one. And if this story found something in you tonight, subscribe and turn on the bell so the next one finds its way to you.